Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our BIMA webinar. Pride is not just for a month. I hope you are enjoying some sunshine, no matter where you're based. My name is Matt. I get the really easy bit today. I pass over to all of the interesting speakers, and I'm going to, like you, I'm going to sit back and enjoy. I think it's just important, though, to give this a bit of context in terms of BIMA. So this morning, I was really excited about this, and I was talking to, I can't say name, a member of my family about this, and the response was, "Oh, that's really cool, but like, don't you work in a technology business?" And I think that isn't an unusual comment, right? It's I think even people within the industry, there's a misconception sometimes that BIMA's just all about the tech, but it's really not. So for every workshop we have an AI, there's something about the people. And I used this expression not so long ago. It's like these websites don't just build themselves, right? There are people, there are personalities behind all of this innovation and technology that we're putting into the world, and that, quite frankly, is changing the world. And we've got a huge responsibility to make sure that the right people in the right mindset are behind that responsibility. So that's why for everything we do on AI, for everything we do on immersive tech, we always do something to support people and make sure that we've got a balanced, inclusive, happy bunch of people behind all the tech and innovation that we're putting out. So I hope that kind of explains why this is so important to us. Thank you so much for joining. It means a huge amount. That really is it from me. Richard's going to pass on. I'm going to pass on to Richard in a sec. He'll cover off a little housekeeping, but please do make it interactive. Like, this is, you're not on camera, you can just sit back, but engage, and please make sure that this isn't the last of it. No, this is about creating a bit of a movement and getting people to take action. So big thanks to the DE&I Council. You're going to meet them all in a moment for doing this. I'm going to sit back and enjoy. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. So yes, as I will share on the next slide, if someone will move me forward, thank you. So yeah, it's really exciting to be hosting this event, especially as we are seeing more and more of the DE&I space reducing. And as members of BIMA, I think we are accountable for driving this space forward. So yeah, today we're going to do a little introduction for some of the members of the BIMA DE&I, answering what does Pride mean to our DE&I Council. Then we've got the wonderful Dame Jame, who will be introducing themselves and sharing a story with us. We'll move on to Danny St. James, who is from notafazed.org, on to Victoria Burrow-Williams, who is a founder of People Done Collective, and then Gordon will finish with Shout Out. They're covering lots of subjects, and I'm really excited to dig into that further. On my next slide, you'll see, so this is me, and what does DE&I mean for me, and what do I think we as BIMA and you as members can own in this space. So for me, it's a feeling of belonging and support from a community, which can drive positive change. I'm really passionate about today's event and how it connects the community with its allies, who are all on different stages of their DE&I journey. And I'm really excited to gain the post-event feedback, your thoughts on how we can help you more. I'll hand over to Sophie.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I've been working in the gender equality space for around 5 years now, but obviously gender equality isn't the only area that we need to improve when it comes to DEI, and that's exactly why I joined the BIMA DEI Council. I really believe that no matter what your background, your race, anything, that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, fairness, and without discrimination, especially in the workplace. And that's why I'm super excited to be part of the DEI Council. But what Pride means to me, it's such a powerful movement. And, you know, I've seen discrimination and all sorts of things through friends and colleagues. And I always think that the kind of the root cause as to why this happens is misunderstanding and bad or misinformation, which often fuels unconscious bias. And that's why this conversation is so important and hearing from such a range of speakers. So I'm looking forward to learning today and hearing from the incredible lineup that's been put together, and kind of expanding on my own understanding, as well as how I can be a better ally and support others too. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Chandeep. So I'm the managing director at Two Toucans, and it's really important for us to include diversity in everything we do. You know, diversity of thought to make better products, and I've got some lived experience as well. I think a lot of what has upset me in the past is when organizations are just talking about, you know, making a difference and not really making that genuine impact. So it's quite important for me to see words translate into those actions. Further to what Sophie said around the education and understanding, I think, you know, I'm no expert on this topic, but I'm hoping to go to my first Pride event in Margate in August. And as part of that journey of us just being more open-minded, I think it's very clear to me is Pride isn't just for the LGBT community, it's for all of us to better understand it so we can better support our friends, our colleagues, our families, and changing that perception. Even this week, I was speaking to somebody who said, why do we have International Women's Day? It should be every day. And, you know, there's so much to be done around all of these different areas of just educating people that, yeah. So hence, there's a point here around including the excluded groups as well. I think there's definitely a lot happening in terms of the world of politics and people having that othering. So I think this is quite important for us to speak even louder about the injustices in the world. And it's not just a nice to have. I mean, there's things happening in North America. Pride this week had a second protest over in Hungary. So yeah, thanks. I will now pass over to Rita.
Thanks, Chandeep. Hi, everyone. So I'm founder of Telescopic, a digital transformation agency. I came to the DA Council as a women in tech, which is obviously, I have a fair share of experience of being in a minority. Currently a 10-people remote team that turned out to be very diverse. And it really never mattered. So this is kind of the one thing that I have to kind of do in a more consciousness and what to tell everyone about. That's where I am here. And for me, Pride, it's not just, as I say, not just about a month of rainbows, although it was the greatest party I ever had when I was 16 in my first Pride in Vienna, just saying. But it's about the practical choices that we make every day, really, especially in a world like ours, as Chandeep just said. We can decide how we run our own meetings, how we write our own policies, and how generally we just speak to each other. And these small things, if you do them really consistently, they can really send an important message. And then we can drown out all the kind of shouting people that destroy the world at the moment. Basically, inclusion isn't someone else's job. It's kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Just before we introduce Dame Jane, I'd like to thank all our speakers for their time today to highlight the struggle in the DE&I space and demystify some of the bombardment of fake news that is flowing through all channels. We'll discuss how to be an active ally, share what you can do no matter what stage you're at within your DE&I journey. They'll be opening up the conversations in what we've created is a safe space. So we really encourage you to ask questions. Each speaker will leave space to answer some of them, and any that aren't answered, we will follow up with. So as they are presenting the content, please, within the chat, just ask questions. We'll capture those and then we can play them back. Don't be shy. As members of BIMA, we can hold our sector to account to be better and to be stronger. So now I'm very excited to introduce the wonderful Dame Jane, who will share their story, demystify some of the value of drag queen story time. And I personally have heard this before, and if I'd had this when I was younger, I definitely would have had a less traumatic time in my coming out. So we will stop sharing the slides and bring you Dame Jane.
Hello. Can you see me? No.
No.
Yes, no. Oh, here we go. I'm terrible with tech. Give me a second. Here we go. Oh, wait. Hello.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to meet you all. Hello, Richard. I am Dame Jane, and I'm a drag queen and performer based in Margate, but I work internationally. I've been to Scotland. I've been to Wales. I'm international. Yeah, and I am a gay man. I became a drag queen, I think about 5 years ago. It's now my full-time job, and it's wonderful. I started Drag Queen Storytime just before the pandemic because I really felt that representation matters. I know firsthand how deeply traumatic it can be growing up without positive representation as a gay or queer person. I grew up in a small town in Lincolnshire near Scunthorpe, and it was really hard for me, as it is for most LGBTQ people when they're growing up. But I had no representation, and actively had adults who were homophobic, queerphobic, just not very nice. And so I thought about what could I do to let kids see that actually being different is okay. And it's no matter what the media says, it's not an adult form of entertainment. It's not sexualizing children. Basically, my sessions are to let children know that being okay is different, that some boys like boys, some girls like girls, some children or some adults or everybody likes everybody. There's no sort of set thing, and that's all okay. So I started Drag Queen Storytime, and during the pandemic, I live streamed it, and it became very popular, and it was great. And I saw firsthand from parents, or heard firsthand from parents, how great it was for them, and not even just for queer children, but just to have somebody, a regular thing every week of people engaging with them. But yeah, and then so I do Drag Queen Storytime wherever anybody wants me. Recently, I was in an amazing school in Ramsgate, and did a whole day there. My housemate's a teacher, so she programmed my day as if I was a teacher. So I had one break in the middle of the day and back-to-back sessions. And as a drag performer, I'm not really used to that, because we like a little break and we like a little drink, and we can't have that at school. So that was a hard day, but it was lovely because there was some amazing children there. It's World Book Day, so they were dressed up. And there was one little child who born as a boy. They're living as a boy, but they enjoy dressing up. So they were Glinda from Wicked for the day. And it was incredible to see that even though this little boy was in a dress, actually to all the children, it was fine. It was normal. There was no learned behaviours or no prejudice that had been put on them. So that was, they just were living authentically, and it was beautiful. So yeah, I really see firsthand the value of things like Drag Queen Storytime and LGBT education in school, and sort of, I think it's really important that we demystify what that is, because it's not about indoctrinating children into the LGBTQ family. It's just about letting people be who they want to be. So I'm going to read my favorite story for you today, which is called "My Shadow is Pink" by Scott Stewart. I'll try and show you as much of the pictures as I can, but I might get carried away because I love it so much. There are bits that I want you to join in on. I know you think I can't see you all, but I actually can. I've been given a secret login, so I'll make sure you're all working really hard. Okay, "My shadow is pink." And Scott wrote this for Colin, and they said, "You are loved exactly as you are. My dad has a shadow that's blue as can be, and there's nothing but blue in my whole family tree." Here is a lovely, lovely family tree. "But mine is quite different. It's not what you think, for mine is not blue. My shadow is pink. My shadow loves ponies and books and pink toys, princesses, fairies and things not for boys. But there's one thing it likes most, I have found. My shadow loves wearing dresses and dancing around. Now my shadow, it spins. Right, at home, what I'd like you to do is safely put your Prosecco down. You're going to have a nice little spin around for me. Here we go. After 3, everybody spin. 1, 2, 3. Woo, there we go. Look at you. Even Rita with the headset, I can see you there. So my shadow, it spins. And then my shadow, it sparkles. We're going to do nice sparkly hands together like this. Like we've got loads of glitter on and we're at a party. Oh, everybody do it after 3. 1, 2, 3. Woo! There we go. Okay, this one is difficult. It twirls through the air. So what I want you to do is imagine that you're twirling through the air. It can be wherever you want, a deserted beach, a lovely mountain. So after 3, twirl through the air. Twirl. 1, 2, 3. Lovely. Great twirling there. But it stops when my dad walks in with a stare. It will turn blue one of these days. Don't worry, he says. It's just a phase. Now this is the dad. Wonderful. My dad's shadow is blue. It's big and it's strong. But when I stand with it, I just feel wrong. I wish mine was blue like all of the others. I wish mine was blue like my dad and my brothers. I'd be part of the group of that, there's no doubt. But I cannot fit in when my shadow stands out. Now, things are all changing, and that is not cool. I'm ready to start my first day of school. You'll need, and there's a list, pencils and books, and lunch you must bring. Dress up with your shadow in its favourite thing. My heart skips a beat as I put on my dress. But I look at my dad, who is anxious and stressed. He takes me to class and I turn and say bye. His face is all worried. There's fear in his eyes. So I step out the doorway and I puff out my chest. Everyone at home, I want you to puff out your chest and be as strong and brave as you can be. Ooh, there we go, lovely. I try to say hi, but my voice, it's too quiet. The kids turn around and the room, it goes silent. Here they are. I run out the door and I push past my dad. I run to my house feeling angry and sad. If my shadow was blue, I'd be there making friends. I'd be laughing and playing and drawing with pens. So I rip off my dress, throw it down to the floor. I won't wear it again, not ever, no more. But then at my door came a soft little knock. It's my dad walking in, and I look up in shock. Both he and his shadow in dresses, they stood with shimmering seams and pink sparkling hoods. He speaks in a voice that's quite soft, but it's stern. Pick up that dress. You must listen and learn. Your shadow is pink. I see now it's true. It's not just a shadow. It's your innermost you. Then he showed me the photos of parents and brothers and sisters and aunts and aunties and others. We've all had a shadow that's hidden from eyes. Sometimes our shadow, it lives in disguise. His shadow loves painting and fashion and art. Her shadow loves engines and powerful cars. His shadow loves dance. It twirls and it turns. Her shadow, it hides. Her shadow likes girls. His shadow loves theatre and acting and plays. Her shadow loves science and planets and space. Your shadow is you, and pink it will be. So stand up with your shadow and yell, "This is me." We're all going to do that together. Stand up with our shadows. And after 3, we're going to say, this is me. Ready? Deep breath, warm up. 1, 2, 3. This is me. And some, they will love you, and some they will not. But those that do love you, they'll love you a lot. So put on that dress and get back to school. And if someone won't like you, then they are the fool. My heart nearly burst and my shadow, it soared. So I pick up my dress and I wear it once more. We run out the door, this time holding hands. My dad and our shadows, together we stand. I stride in my class and I puff out my chest. We're going to puff out our chest together, everybody. Come on, puff out those chests. Richard, I can see you. Puff out the chest. Here we go. I stride in my class and I puff out my chest. I may be different, but different is best. I join a small group and in it, I don't blend, but they look up and smile. Will you be our friend? And that's the end of the story. Thank you. I love that story. It's a really lovely story about how we can just accept people for who they are and have a lovely time. I always finish my storytime sessions by making everybody do what I do every morning. So when I wake up in the morning, I look in my magical mirror and I say, Dame Jane, you are beautiful. You are powerful and you can be anything that you want to be. So after 3, we're going to say our name and say, I am beautiful, I am powerful, and I can be anything I want to be. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Dame Jane, you are beautiful, you are powerful, and you can be anything you want to be. Thank you. And I just want to leave you with a little quick funny story. It's not that funny, but I had a bit of backlash when I was doing Drag Queen Storytime recently by somebody that said that drag queens going to school wanted to groom children. And my response was, I do not want to groom your children. I want to groom their dads. Thank you. Thank you so much. You've been amazing. Any questions, you can fire them over to Richard, get them to me. You can follow me on Instagram, ask me anything. I'm always here to chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dame Jane. Yeah, we'll follow up afterwards with links to all our speakers' socials, links to the book that Dame James has just shared, and how you can get in contact if you want more of the Dame. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lovely. So following Dame Jane, we have the equally wonderful Danny St. James, who I can see has joined. So we will hand over. So Not a Phase is a trans-led grassroots charity dedicated to awareness campaigning, social products, and funding of new initiatives for our community. I'll put my teeth back in a minute. So I'm really interested to introduce Danny. As I said before, while Danny's presenting, we are expecting questions to come into the chat. So anything that's been discussed or not being discussed that you wanted to know more about, please ask those questions, and then one of the panelists will ask those at the end. So I shall hand over to Danny.
Hello, can you all hear me okay? Great.
Yeah, I can.
Thank you very much. Look, it's lovely to be here. I know we've done bits and pieces before. It's always nice to be asked back. As Richard said, my name is Danny and I'm Chief Exec at Not a Phase, which I'm going to get onto in a little bit. I think they've got some slides that are going to be getting geared up for me at the moment.
Yeah, next slide.
It's actually really nice to be invited to talk this year. It's a funny one because usually for the last sort of 5 years, my calendar week to week is broken up by either speaking commitments or workshops with different companies and businesses. And this year, this is actually my first one of the year, which I think is incredibly telling of where we are currently with DE&I. It's already shaping up to be a really difficult year, and we're going to get onto all of that bit. Unfortunately, I have to get through some doom and gloom in my talks in order to get onto the positives. So yeah, lovely to be here. And this is a completely new presentation because of the timing as well. So I've got all these post-its stuck to my screen, although I would advise if anybody else is going to buy post-its in the future, definitely buy brand name, because these are not, and they are falling off the screen. So as you see me keep scrambling to get scraps of paper. So yeah, definitely worth the extra few quid, I'd say. Thanks. All right, do you want to just move on to my next slide, please? Great. Look, I know that some of you are familiar with the work that we've done over the years, but I also know that many of you may have absolutely no idea who I am, who the charity is. So I thought it'd be a great start just to give you some background on who we are. Not Phase was launched kind of around the same time as COVID, to be honest. We were going through a particularly awful time around those months. You might remember our equalities minister from that time period. She was often compared to a lettuce. Her name was Liz Truss. She at the time was Minister for Women and Equalities, and there were some documents that were leaked that came out of her office around March of 2020 that detailed the plans to withdraw healthcare from trans youth and also to restrict the access to single-sex spaces like prison units, hospital wards, changing rooms, toilets, anything that's broken up by gender was going to become anti-trans under the Tory government of the time. So that, coupled with just how awful and emotional that time period was for everybody, it galvanized us and made us say, we have to bloody do something about this, me and a few friends. And it began with a t-shirt that said, "It's not a phase, support trans youth." And we were planning to sell them to raise money for another trans charity some of you may have heard of. It's called Mermaids. They support the families and loved ones of trans kids. And we started posting about these t-shirts, and 2020 being the year of social justice that it was, people really started paying attention to what we were up to. And we sold thousands of these t-shirts within a matter of months. I mean, well, within the matter of the first few weeks, we knew we were on something. But by the time we ended up paying the money over to Mermaids for that fundraiser, we'd sold thousands of these t-shirts. And what we learned from the success of it straight away was that there was clearly an audience that wanted to engage with the trans rights movement of the time, and also just the fact that what we were doing was intentionally joyful, and that's something that I think has made us become palatable, I'd say, to working with brands and companies. Really quickly, we got great corporate support. 2 weeks after we launched, Victoria Beckham did a fundraiser for us. We went into big brand partnerships really early on, which were actually really pivotal for us as we spent those first 9 months becoming a charity and establishing ourselves as a charity, which is really long, boring legal process that I have no regrets with Not a Phase, but if I could go back, I might say that we should be a CIC rather than a charity, just because of how strenuous it is to become one. But we made it, and by the end of 2020, we were an established charity. That period of time was really helpful for us, I think, because we were able to have lots of ground level conversations with our community, both in London, which is where we all lived at the time. I'm now a Margate resident, as I know a few people on the call are. But the the ability it gave us to reach out to our community allowed us to ask the question of what do you need most from a trans charity right now. This helped us establish our initiatives, which grew rapidly through that time. I've listed a couple of the main things that we do today. Misfits, as an example, was a response to the number one response we got to our survey of what do you need most right now, was that trans people said that they needed access to self-defense lessons, which is obviously quite alarming. But the way that we repositioned it was by utilizing other information that we had gotten about fitness and wellness feeling exclusionary, just on the grounds that it's all cut up into men need to do this, women need to do that, men should eat this, women should eat that. And so we sort of like hodgepodged that together, and it's become what Misfits is today, which is a fitness, wellness and self-defense program that runs 2 to 3 times a week all over the country. We have 9 locations for Misfits, as well as the other things that we do. We also run Trans Connect, which is a huge roster of online support service groups. We actively engage in campaigning, advocacy work, DE&I consultation. And today we have over 4,000 active monthly service users, so quite busy. I think we can go on to the next one now. This is the bit where I get a bit doom and gloom, unfortunately, but I think that when we're talking about trans topics, it's all well and good me telling you about all of the joyful, lovely work that we do, but I think it's really important for me to give you the facts behind why our work would be needed in what I think many people assume is a very liberal time period, when in fact we are really struggling. Throughout our first 4 years of being a charity, I was like looking at my watch thinking, when are these Tories going to bugger off and let us live in the liberation that the left will come in and they are going to save us? And sadly, that is not the case. We are still very much at the forefront of political debate fodder. The Labour Party upheld the ban of puberty blockers restricting vital healthcare for young trans people. They threw out plans for making the application to get a gender recognition certificate easier. Gender recognition certificate, I have one. I got one because I got married, but very long, arduous process where you need to have a lawyer and all of that. And essentially, it corrects your birth certificate. But with the legislation taking the direction that it is going in, it's kind of a vital safety mechanism for our community. For example, using travel as using travel as an example. In the States now, they are saying that your passports and travel documents have to match your birth certificate. Now, for many trans people, their passport and their birth certificate are obviously different because you're able to change your passport quite easily. What's the result of that is that many trans people across the States are having their passports null and voided and reissued under their assigned gender at birth. What tends to happen with these political issues that we look over at America in absolute horror with is that I like to use the analogy that America gets the flu and the UK sneezes. Everything that happens over there really does reverberate into our politics, and we have seen in recent months old Keir Starmer chumming up to Mr. Trump, which is not giving me a sense of hope as the leader of a trans organization. In addition to these pressures of the political landscape is the media. The media's treatment of trans people right now is an absolute cycle of what we already saw with gay men. We saw the way that gay men were treated in the wake of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. The language that was used against them, that they were grooming children, that they were unsafe to be around, that they were going to radicalize your kids, steal your husband, brick your window, kill your cat. We are seeing the exact same language used against trans people today, which is very, very scary. And with the backdrop of this, it's difficult for me to explain just how much our healthcare system in this country has failed my community. Just to talk in sort of like numbers, if I today were going to my GP's office, this is London specific. There are examples of it being faster outside, but London specific. So I went to a GP in London, and I was lucky enough that a GP was able to understand how to treat a trans patient and how to refer a trans patient to specialists, because trans healthcare is an elective topic for GPs. They do not have to learn about trans healthcare, and as a result, many do not. If I was referred to London's gender services today, I would on average be waiting 17 years for my first appointment to see a specialist. This is due to the backlog of trans people waiting in London. This broken system of gatekeeper, there's no sense of self-referral, has essentially privatized the healthcare system from my community. And as a result of that, even the very few private healthcare providers for trans people in the UK at the moment have a minimum of a 2-year wait list. That's private healthcare minimum wait year of two years, which is over what the NHS guarantee as their maximum wait time. Just to give that context, in the NHS's governance, it guarantees that nobody would ever wait above 18 months for a specialist referral. If you think of sort of like, if you keep getting tonsillitis and you need to go and see an ENT specialist, you'd never wait more than a year and a half because it goes against the NHS governance. However, trans healthcare, not quite given the same treatment, unfortunately. The impact of this, of the healthcare crisis especially, is that we are in an epidemic of mental health decline, which is why services like ours are so vital. I think, you know, I within my role, I get asked all the time, sort of like, oh, my best friend's niece has just come out as trans. She's 21. What advice would you give her? And my advice, oh, I don't know if it's something's just popped up from a not otter thing. I don't know if that's for me. Oh, it doesn't look like that's for me. Somebody needs to pay their bills. The advice that I always give to either young trans people or very early days trans people is that your biggest lifeline is going to be connecting to your community, whether that be in person or online. I always say we are waiting for you with open arms. You've just got to find us. And so although some of our services, objectively, to look at them as an outsider, you might think, well, why do trans people need free fitness classes? Or why do trans people need to get together and talk about their experience? It's an absolute vital lifeline when you live outside of a liberal city bubble. You know, if I was transitioning 22-year-old in the Scottish Highlands, how likely am I going to find people like me to talk to about how isolating it feels? So hence, this is why, to cap it all off, not only has there never been a greater need for joy within our community, but also for our services to remain. I think I can go to my next slide, please, Rich. Okay, here's the one where I've made some good notes for it. So I think you would have to be walking through the world with your eyes closed at the moment to not have seen what's going on with diversity, equity and inclusion rollbacks across both the UK and also internationally, especially America. What we are seeing is with the cuts of roles and budgets internally is not only are companies rolling back on their internal initiatives to open the door to marginalized groups, companies are also no longer engaging with pride celebrations, with LGBT charities, with charities set up to support people that are disabled. The impact of these internal cuts reverberates way outside of the company, not only within their own employee base. And then I've written here, companies are shamelessly prioritizing profit. Probably quite extreme, but it's true. This experience, I always think is really important to mention, is completely intersectional. This doesn't only affect trans people. And if you're within a minority group and you think that they're not coming for you, I promise you they'll be coming for you next. The experience of seeing DE&I roles cut is affecting people of color, it's affecting disabled people, it's affecting trans people, it's affecting queer people of queer women. It's, you name it, this is going to reverberate across all marginalized groups. And the terminology of anti-woke has solely become a whistleblower, which actually means anti-trans or just prejudice as a whole. I think we can go to the next slide. How does this affect the third sector? Third sector meaning charity work, the type of thing that I do. The rise in anti-trans rhetoric, politically and in the media, means that our community needs this type of project. Oh, I'm just trying to say what Richard said. I don't know if I can see notes on here. Yeah, correct. With the rise of hate in the media and with our politicians means that people have never felt lower and more isolated, which is when they turn to charities like ours. However, as I said, this is my first DE&I talk of the year, and to be completely transparent, we have lost almost every one of our corporate partners this year. The money that we have that we've been able to meet our rapid growth over the last 5 years has completely gone out the window. We're in a huge partnership with a leading sportswear brand. They dropped us about 2 months ago. All of the corporate money has withdrawn. This has led to us looking at our future as a charity and thinking, okay, how many more months can we run this service on what we've got left? I look at my team every day, you know, not only have we've got a really small core team of 5 members of staff, we work with 22 freelancers on a month-to-month basis, most of whom are trans. 70% of my staff are trans. And they rely on us to keep them in work. And I'm looking at them all and thinking, it's a matter of months if we don't see some big change. What I'm really hoping is where more people like myself are starting to have conversations about this, is that there are great people working for big organizations, and our current messaging to all of them is, we need you right now to double down if you believe in the movement, because where so many are pulling back in fear, we need the ones that are prepared to fight with us. We need them to double down. It's really tough for me to come on and tell you about our optimism. I'll be honest, like I really struggled with preparing this presentation, and I've struggled with my team meetings over the last few weeks, because there's just this like looming sense of no one's coming to save you, you know, that one liner, like no one's coming. It's a really tough time. Anyway, with that said, a lot of the time when I get we can go to the next slide as well, please, Rich. When I get asked to come into people's offices, I know that the audience for this, many of you work for different companies as well, so it's not just one company I'm talking to. Sorry, I'm seeing sad faces in the chat. Don't worry, Jules. We'll promise. I promise we'll end on a high. a lot of the time I get invited into quite solemn grey offices in like Canary Wharf with grey people in grey suits in grey rooms with grey expressions. But the main reason I'm invited into those spaces is A, to bring a bit of colour to the room, but also to talk about how do we create a safe space here for our trans, hopefully future colleagues. And I think that these will also affect many other marginalised groups as well. It's just creating a safe space for all. I think, especially in the UK, the majority of people want to work for a company whom they believe fights for the little guy. I think having a safe space for the minority creates a happy space for the majority. My background prior to working in charities was working in people management and recruitment. I'm going to tell you a really quick little horror story of why I believe signposting is the most important part of any safe space creation. I was working for this big firm in Cannon Street in London, and I was really happy. I was in a senior role in the company. I loved my job pre-COVID, and I wanted to go and get facial feminization surgery, which would, and it did leave me looking like an egg for a while afterwards. I was so swollen, but I knew that was going to be the case. And so I asked my line manager, hey, I'm going to need to book an extended period of time off, probably 8, if not 12 weeks to recover from this surgery. I might be able to work from home. I'm not really sure. I don't know what this looks like. And he would have otherwise had the authorization to sign that off. But of course, I had to go and have a meeting with the CEO of the company over it, which wasn't needed. But it was just to give that context. When I started interviewing for the company, they told me it would be 3 interviews. I actually ended up doing 6 interviews. And when I did get the job, I went out for my welcome drinks, and a director in the company said, oh, we're just so happy to have you here. The reason we kept asking you to come back in is that we weren't sure whether we were ready for one of your lot in the office. And I just had to smile and go, okay, fine. So I got drafted in with the founder and CEO of this big firm, who was terrifying. This woman was terrifying. Think of like the film The Witches, just absolutely terrifying woman, waiting to take her skin off and become the evil one. And I told her that I needed some time off for surgery, and she then made me tell her in depth about the surgery and what other surgery I had or hadn't had. Not a great starting point. And then she kind of stopped and stared at me and went, aren't you like really famous in tranny land? Why do you work here? Owner of the company. And at the time, I think I was just like, and she's like, yeah, my daughters Googled you. They saw so much about you. I just don't know why you work here. And I was like, I just really love my job. I actually really do love my job. I love working here. I don't know. It was horrible. And the reason I tell you that story is that I came out of that meeting, and over the months I'd worked there, I had befriended the head of HR, and I spoke to her and was like, this is what she just said to me. And she was like, yeah, she's like that. I don't know. There was no signposting in the company. There was no one that I could talk to about an experience like that, or about when the director told me that they weren't ready for one of my lot in the office. Signposting is critical in a business. Creating a role for somebody of you can go and talk to that person if you hear anything, see anything, or experience anything. That might not be the owner of the business, it might not be a director, but it's a trusted person that's got a bit of power and a bit of a swing in the company, and that's the person you can speak to if something goes wrong. Vital. In addition to this, I've put down recruitment. I didn't put that in strategically to tell that story that I just rambled on with. But recruitment practices, as somebody that has been behind the scenes in many businesses and knows how recruitment goes, although a lot of businesses put out a lot of stuff about how they have an equal opportunities policy, I know that that's not the case. I have firsthand seen the homophobia, the xenophobia, the transphobia, the ableism, the racism. I know what goes on behind the scenes. And having a statement, a commitment from the top of we are committed to making our team diverse and representative of the country that we are serving is absolutely integral to welcoming in diverse members of your team. I know that it's unrealistic in some buildings, gender neutral facilities, if possible. Myself and many people in my community now opt to use either accessible spaces or neutral ones. With the current climate, if you've got the ability to do so, we really do appreciate it. A relaxed dress code, if possible. I am 6'1". I've got size 10 feet. It is not realistic for me to come into work in heels. Let me tell you that. And I know that that is the experience of many people in my community. So relax the dress code if you have one, ideally. Thank you. Okay, next one. This is my last slide, I think. I know I've only got 7 minutes left, so I'm gonna wrap things up in 2. I get asked every session that I go to, every talk panel, how can I be a better ally? It's the number one thing. And I changed the way that I answered that about a year ago. And I started saying to people, allyship is the easy bit. Allyship is lazy. Allyship is base level. I just want the best for everybody. Classic British mentality. I want the best for everybody as long as it doesn't stop me from having a holiday every year and me watching Coronation Street at 7:30. Allyship is really, really easy. It's about converting that into advocacy. And when you see something happening, that you say something either to the people involved in the situation or to the person that has been signposted. There are many opportunities to do the learnings about what goes on with the trans community. My friend Sean wrote a fantastic book called The Transgender Issue a couple of years ago, and it is I'm biased, but it's the go-to book to understand how we got here and how the hell we're going to get out of it. Because I do believe in light at the end of the tunnel, and I do believe that this pendulum effect that went one way with the rise of, unfortunately, Caitlyn Jenner, who ever thought we should choose her, and now has swung back the other way to the Donald Trumps of the world. I believe that we're going to land somewhere in the middle, and we are just going to move past this, and hopefully we're going to get there quicker by our allies standing up for us, because for many businesses, the start and finish of their diversity quota is having a gay guy in accounts. Listen, that gay guy's got a hell of a lot of power in that company because he's trusted, and you will listen to lessons from the people that you love and trust. It's really important that you recognize the power in the platform you have, even if that is just within your workplace. We desperately need you at the moment. I think that's me on to the next slide. I've got one more. There we go. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you for sharing such personal stories and yeah, opening up the conversation in this space. I think even for me, like listening and playing devil's advocate, you know, everything you have said obviously makes sense and is required. And I guess when I sort of lay over the corporate business side of things, hearing what you were saying, I guess there is another angle to come at this, because I think us as agencies and part of BIMA, yeah, we have a duty of care to own this space and to have a single voice and then hold our customers and our clients to account. But also we're definitely seeing a lot more coming in for proposals or bids or tenders from prospective clients who are saying an absolute minimum is you have to have diversity. So I think there's a yes, we should be doing this, and everything that has been shared, absolutely. And I think there is a commercial arm, which I hate even saying it as it comes out of my mouth, but I think there's sort of different ways that we can attack it. But yeah, I thank you. Was there any other questions, I guess, before I keep rambling?
There were a couple of questions. By the way, Danny, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And I've got a couple of questions that I would like to ask you as well, but there's some coming in the chat. So first one being around signposting, but also can you give any more practical advice about how to implement and sustain that across the business? So how do they gather, where do they gather that from? We can pull that together, by the way, for anyone attending. But then also, yeah, how would you implement that into a business?
Well, using signposting as an example, I actually think it's very easy. It comes in from like your starter packs when people are welcomed into the business. We have HR refreshers throughout the year. You have training sessions with your staff. It's very easy to say, this is the person that you speak to. I have also seen other companies introduce an anonymous way of doing that, whether that be sort of like an anonymous email address and things like that, you can just report things that are going on, sort of like a whistleblowing line, but within small business models. And then when it comes to implementing further policy change, I would actually recommend that you look at case studies of businesses that are doing it really well, because you can pull template from that. So L'Oreal is a great example of it. Starbucks, great example of it. It depends on the company that you're talking about. Any business that's big enough to have a HR advisor will have sat their CIPD exams. And within that, the CIPD send you out policy templates, and they do have courses for dealing with trans employees. So yeah, the resources are kind of endless on it, but I would definitely recommend sort of like looking at what other people are doing and trying to implement the bits that work for you. We have worked with companies before that have even there are businesses that offer private healthcare as standard with whether that's Vitality or Bupa or something. Businesses that have implemented, we're going to have trans inclusive private healthcare. We've changed the healthcare provider to make sure it's trans inclusive. Vitality isn't. Or it can go down to even minor things. Keep in mind, this sounds like a big wish list, but the reality is that between 0.2 and 0.5% of the population of gender variant. So we're not saying like all of a sudden everybody's going to be taking time off to go and get a boob job. But the option of having paid leave for gender affirming care is also just like a complete lifeline to people, and quite easy for businesses to do, to say like, okay, yeah, no questions asked if you've managed to get an appointment at the gender clinic, just let your line manager know and you go, rather than you be sort of walked across the coals for it, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. And another question was, HR would be the first thought as kind of this person to potentially that people can go to safety, but is it better to have somebody that's independent within the company?
I think so, yeah. I mean, look, the reality is that people are really bloody suspicious of HR people within a company. I think that a big realization has happened over the last few years of people can now see that HR within a company is there to protect the company over the employee. And that's just the truth. Like HR is really there to make sure that the company is not brought into disrepute. So when it comes to really quite delicate matters like this, I think it is important to have somebody that is outside of that team, if possible. Again, this all comes down to scale. With a decent sized business, ideally, yeah.
And within that, just one question before the next one that I wanted to throw in there. I've seen quite a rise on LinkedIn of HR people that are very anti-trans. And the sex is sex and those kind of campaigns that seem to be garnering some attention at the moment. I suppose that would feed into that, wouldn't it? Around making sure that whoever you're signposting, it's not just about their job role, it's about their commitment and allyship or support for the your community.
Yeah, I mean, Look, Sophie, you already said it there, how scary that is.
Yeah.
It's like they walk among us. You know, everybody thinks that anti-trans people is just J.K. Rowling sat in in like a castle sending out tweets calling people a man. It's not. It is everywhere. And that's really scary. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. That's another reason why ideally it should be somebody that doesn't sit within that team.
Definitely.
It's that's a very difficult topic as well, because it's scary.
Yeah, and the last question from Jenny was, in addition to those recommendations, has your experience with past employers shaped how you lead your team now?
Yes, 100%. Yes, it is. Sorry for how quickly I answered that. I not only was shaped by my employers that in sort of like the gender relations thing of like of having trans employees. Um, every bad boss taught me how to be a good one, because I've just looked at them throughout my career in its various forms and thought, God, I would never do that. So yeah, it's definitely, it's been, I'd say it's the thing that's created me as an employer, has been some horrible experiences with other employers.
Well, thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you.
coming on today. And yeah, everyone make sure they follow Danny's work, and let's get trans back on the DEI agenda, because it does feel like, I agree. I feel like there's been some change this year. So let's make sure that we're all rallying around for support.
Thanks so much for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Danny. Lovely. Yeah, that didn't feel like 30 minutes to me at all. I went really quickly. So yes, now I am really excited to introduce our next speaker, Victoria. She is a founder of People Dem Collective, and she's going to share what People Dem Collective is about, her mission, and how to start your DE&I journey, and don't be tokenistic. So I shall hand over to Victoria.
Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
Can you see me? Oh, that's there I am. Amazing.
Yes.
Richard. Hello everyone. I'm Victoria Barrow Williams. I am, as Richard said, one of the co-founders and directors of People Dem Collective. And yeah, if we could have the first slide, that would be great. Yeah, and the next one, brilliant. So I'm, as I said, co-founder and director at People Dem Collective. We're a community organisation based here in Margate. And yeah, we came together 5 years ago, and it was very much a need and yeah, a feeling of not having a space. What was it? A collective of sort of 6 of us with all different sort of jobs, an artist, a teacher, somebody that was within business, property. And yes, there was this sort of shared lived experience that Margate hadn't really had anything that was signposted for us for the Black, Brown and diaspora community. So we were meeting every Sunday, sharing food, music, poetry, pieces of writing, and sort of in the midst of that, we were on the computer, Googling what's a CIC and trying to figure out what sort of structure it would be, you know, and what was it that we wanted? What was this thing, this vision? And I think, you know, within that time, we were healing, we were creating a space for us to be heard, share our experiences. You know, a lot of us had experiences within the town with different stakeholders, and experienced, you know, those systemic barriers, to put it bluntly, racism. And so we were really trying to figure out what is it that we could create that could support us in our own journey living in Margate. And I think the one thing that really stood out for us was this idea of something that was long term, right? It needed to be something that had legacy, and I think that became really apparent. So I guess I'd say about 4 or 5 months after we were meeting, of course, COVID happens. This was back in sort of 2019 going into 2020. and COVID hits. That kind of prevented us from seeing each other, but we were still doing the Zoom, just figuring it out, of course, signing up and keeping the sort of the microphone on mute. So we all experienced those little stumbling steps of trying to still connect as a community. But yeah, what did happen was you, of course, had the murder of George Floyd, and yes, that really created some momentum. It felt like at that point in time, the world was listening. Again, it's important, you know, this isn't first time that the world has listened, or a moment has created for us a window, an opportunity for visibility, for people to start questioning what the status quo is. And that did create a moment. And a few of us had gone to marches in London, but we live here, you know, our lived experiences in Margate. And so it felt really important for us to do something within our community. So we very quickly mobilized some really beautiful marches that was very much about getting the community together, very much family orientated, inviting families and children. And again, it was just a moment for us to, within the community, really speak to our lived experience, but to say, you know, not here. And, you know, I've got to admit that when we did this, I remember we were sort of waiting at the sort of the park. There was this, it was called a pirate park, and that's where we were all kind of meeting. And of course, on Facebook, I think 200 people said that they were going to attend. So for us, that was great. This was our first time really being open as a collective, but was really determined to kind of create a space for our community to come together and really respond to what was happening, you know, across the world. And yeah, so we anticipated 200 people, but what actually happened was 4,000 plus members of the community in Thanet, Kent and beyond came and was there in solidarity, right? And we were sort of walking down the coast and walking towards Turner Contemporary, which is this big art gallery in Margate, which sits just on the front of the sort of the water there on these steps, sort of its front garden really. And as we sort of kind of made our way weaving down into the town beside the Turner Contemporary on these steps, which just had the sort of the sea just coming up against those steps, and we were kind of all snaking, you know, moving and trying to create space and looking up this hill and just seeing these crowds and seeing this solidarity and seeing, and you get, again, must be so transparent that, you know, we live in Margate, and actually it wasn't a sea of all members of the Black, Brown and diaspora community. No, there was a huge amount of allies and of our community, a real mix of everyone who were saying, you know, that this wasn't going to happen here. And this was very much a moment for Margate and Thanet and Kent to speak to how we were responding to that. And you just had this soundscape of the sea and, of course, seagulls, as a lot of us, you know, knelt in silence, in solidarity for the murder of George Floyd. And it's very much that was a moment for us, I think, as an organisation, and as for a town, as a community, that, again, going back to that thing about long term, what is going to be the thing that we can look back in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, and look back and say, this is what happened, and this is how we responded. And that really just created the momentum for what People Don't Collective is all about right now. And that's about spatial justice. That's about shifting and nudging at the system to create change. And most of all, what we've been trying to do over the last 5 years is to develop and establish a cultural centre based in Margate. This is going to be a place that has programmes within art and culture, education, healing, a place of joy. I think I heard Danny speak about that earlier, and it's just so important, a space of joy and celebration. And most importantly for us, it's that thing that really is going to signpost the impact and that long-term commitment and legacy to change in Margate. And so a lot of our programs are really important in the work that we do within organisations. But for us, what it's about is that legacy. And so for us, that is the piece. So yeah, I'm hoping to talk a little bit more about, you know, beyond the day, beyond Pride Day, beyond all of those amazing days that I got to say, I'm really excited to experience as well, because it is an opportunity for visibility. But what are you actually going to do in order to make sure that you're showing up long term? And before we go on to the next slide, I just would love you to just think about that. You know, what does real solidarity, you know, mean to you? How can you show up? What does that mean to you? And yeah, feel free to put it in the chat or just to think about it. But I think it's really important to understand and interrogate, what does real solidarity mean to you? Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so as I said, of course, you know, these days can be an amazing opportunity for celebration and visibility. But, you know, one day isn't solidarity. Let's be real, it is PR. You know, solidarity lasting for 24 hours really isn't going to make, you know, big changes. So it's really, yeah, you know, vital. Though myself, I love to put on events, and I love for this to be an opportunity to show and create access to artists, for example, that we work with. And I mean, we've done a number of different events, working with a number of different types of organizations and communities. We've worked in medical schools, we've gone to universities, we've gone into art schools, we've gone into galleries, we've gone into music, you know, we've done it all. And it's an amazing opportunity to celebrate, as I said. But it's really important to think about, what is that long term? What, you know, a lot of this work, what happens after with that artist or that community member or that leader? They continue to do the work day to day. You know, they are doing that work, they are living that work, they are trying to create equity, trying to create access, trying to gain, you know, some sort of care or healing. They are the ones that are really working up against that system. So I think it's really important when looking at DE&I is really, what is that? What is your impact beyond the day? Yes, the day can be an opportunity to celebrate, but it should be an opportunity to celebrate what you're doing for the rest of the year, and to always think about the partners that you're working with and the collaborators, is that it doesn't end for them on that day. They're going to continue to be doing that work across the year. And I think one more thing on this is, I think it's really important, especially at this point, you know, on Pride Day, when we're talking about this type of work, is often, I don't know if other practitioners on here or collaborators will have the same experiences, that we might get a message, you know, in September. So it's a month before the day, but also it just demonstrates how much it's an afterthought, because they're thinking about it the month before for this one special day. So that is even worse. So I really would hope that you would think more and more about, you know, what can you do beyond just the one day? And again, creating the habit and a way of your approach to that day. If you are going to be celebrating, you know, International Women's Day, Pride, Black History Month, then also, how long has it taken you to come to the decision of what's happening on that day? What's happened before? What is happening after? So yes, can we go on to the next slide, please, Richard? What's showing up really, you know, what does it really look like? For us, it's about restorative partnerships. It's not extractive ones. It's ones that are creating, you know, opportunities of platforming or visibility and resourcing. There's an element of care within that. And I think there's also an element of vulnerability. And I think that's important to talk about the vulnerability on both sides, because I think for us, it's very much about relationship. And that's why it's important to have those opportunities for that long-term strategy that allows for those sort of restorative partnerships, because it means that you can start to create one that allows for that vulnerability. I want to talk about Turner Contemporary as an example, because that's one of the stakeholders that we work with. And I think that will give you a feel of how, you know, partnership work can happen, how it can show up within your work. And again, this is geared towards partnerships, but I think it also can be used when thinking about how you're working with different partners, specifically in relation to DEI. And I think it can go, this kind of methodology and approach can work across all areas, not just within partnership work. So Turner Contemporary, as I mentioned earlier before, very much we were on their sort of their front garden when doing this this march. And so, I mean, for us, actually, at that point in time, we made sure that we sent out a response to all of the major stakeholders in Margate. And what we were saying was, you know, please do not have a hurried response. Please don't be really quick to put on that black square on your Instagram, you know, on your Instagram, because that approach really isn't the one. This is really not going to make a change. And I think, again, it's going back to, you know, when we're thinking about just having that day, it's not just doing that post. It's really thinking about what is that sort of, how is it embedded within your organization? And for us, it was important that we were really clear about how we wanted to work with partners across Margate. So we got in touch, and what was really empowering was to see that the Turner Contemporary was really open to listening. I think Richard mentioned that before. You know, it's so key in listening, in understanding how communities, especially those that are marginalized, specifically want to be worked with, you know, to have that voice, and to not feel like you're just being parachuted in. So we went and had a meeting with the Turner Contemporary, and this was at sort of COVID time. So it was a massive circle, making sure that we were kind of not very close to each other, because everyone was all very nervous about COVID. So it was quite an unreal experience in terms of not being able to be that close to one another, but actually talking about stuff that was really, really important. And again, to just give context, another thing, we had lived experience. We were able to attend that meeting, not just as members of this collective and of this organisation, but also members of the community that have experienced either working in the Turner Contemporary or the experience being an audience member. So we came with this knowledge and this expertise. And what we were able to do is start to build those foundations of that relationship, that partnership. And from the very outset, it was very much about, this is an opportunity for us to collaborate, but it's about that long term. How are we going to work with one another to support Turner Contemporary and its efforts to now rethink about the ways in which it's working? A lot of people were confronted at that point across the sector in all different industries about how they were showing up. How were they anti-racist? This really created momentum for those conversations to happen. But it was really clear that this relationship needed to work both ways. How are they going to support and change sort of the power dynamic and the equity? What can they do to support us on our journey as a sort of new organisation? So we had collected placards and posters from the marches, and we had said, let's really speak to what's in the zeitgeist right now, and be really responsive to what this community needs and how we want to respond to what's happening in the world. So we suggested an exhibition. And I think it's really important. The reason why I use this as an example is because I don't know if anyone has any experience of galleries and quite a lot of organisations. There's quite a lot of barriers to get things done in relation to programming things. A lot of people are working a year or years ahead. So for them to be able to work outside of a system which normally would require, months or years of preparation, it really showed how they were listening to us, to what was the needs of us as a community, the wider community, and again, beyond that, it became what the national need was. And actually it ended up being international, because our exhibition was actually covered by the New York Times as an example of how people were responding. So it really just shows that there's this sort of partnership, and having this really care for listening to what are the needs of the community that you're working with, allows for people to have that element of being able to bend in the breeze and be like, okay, we have certain systems in place, but actually what is best for our community? And they were able to do that. So again, it was this new way of working for them, and we created a space of vulnerability. And I think that's really important, because people are scared to get things wrong, right? And I think this this work is important. But one of the things that we so determined as an organization and when we're working with our partners is to ensure that fear is not going to be the thing that stops us from doing the work. That we create a space for things to go wrong. And that's our approach as an organization, is to have that transparency when we don't get it right, but to then think about how we can move forward and how we can get it right. And we wanted to make sure that that was something that we could share with organizations that we work with. And that's how we have supported Turner Contemporary in changing ways in which they've worked. And very much believe that when you look at how they're working with other community organizations, we've had a real impact on how they work with organizations, how they pay organizations, the way in which they communicate, the care that is given. All of those things have been impacted by the work that we've done, the building blocks that we've created from that very beginning of that relationship. We've gone on to, fast forward to 5 years from that exhibition. What that exhibition allowed us to do in terms of, not just about exhibiting in the gallery, but it allowed us also to go on to create an art festival. It gave us agency, and it allowed us to be able to talk with other stakeholders to gain other opportunities. So it's really important to think about where the equity is within your organization. It's not always to do with paid opportunities. It's sometimes having extra support within your staff and your crew, being able to offer your expertise within a specific area. So, for example, the Turner Contemporary supported us on some of our marketing needs, and there was a real exchange, right? So fast forward 5 years, we've gone on to do many different projects with them. Again, doing things that are kind of testing and pushing and nudging at the system that they're used to. Projects where normally have 8 outreach programs where you are invited to go into their gallery. Where we're like, no, you're going to come to our space. We're going to center our community. And then maybe we might come and see that exhibition. And we've then gone on to, last year we did our first late. And again, this is a paid opportunity for us to produce our own event, giving us agency, allowing us to program and be able to create a platform for other Black and brown artists. So the ecosystem that we've kind of generated through this sort of restorative partnership, it supports them in being able to show up better for our community. It means that, for example, the exhibition had over 17,000 people attend it in 1 month. And again, the demographic was totally different to what they were used to. So it's really important to look at how these types of partnerships, they don't have to be extractive, and they can be beneficial to both partners. Can we go on to the next slide? How to show up beyond the day. Yeah, these are really quick and easy, but fund your DI programs like your CSR, so your corporate social responsibility. They're often seen to be sometimes separate, and unfortunately, a lot of things that are covered with the DEI programs, we're seeing like sometimes they're less than, and actually for me, they're just as important. And it's important often, to look at the ecosystem, and we're looking at the ecology and how ensuring that we're doing the right things to support and the ecosystem and our locality. But the humans that live within that are also important. So I don't think these need to be separated. They need to be sort of resourced exactly the same. Again, sort of embedding, DEI into your KPIs. It's not just, your calendar. It's not just the day. How are we ensuring that we're working towards a sort of culture within your organization that is promoting, what that celebration is going to be when you all kind of come together in October for Black History Month, that you can reflect, this is all the stuff that we've been doing across the year, right? And kind of challenging people to really put it at the forefront of the way in which they work, the way in which they recruit. Yes, again, hire us to lead, not just to educate. It's about ensuring, quite often we go into places that are resourcing amazing sort of outreach opportunities where they can kind of create visibility for leaders like myself or artists. But then when actually you come and look at the boards and you look at who has actually got the power, it starts to dissolve. because actually there's no one who's got actually real agency within that workspace, right? So it's really important that we're not just thinking about the short term, we're thinking about what are the strategies to ensure that, you know, there's representation across the board within the power structure. Audit, again, really lovely, moves it onto that, is, you know, audit who has the power, not just who, who's got presence. I think that's one of the things that's been quite a challenge for us, is representation is obviously really important and is key, but that's not the only part of the puzzle. It's the power. How do we shift that? You know, it's so important. And again, going back to that relationship that we fostered with Turner Contemporary, build relationships. It's not just campaigns. It's not just about that one-off experience. There's something really beautiful about being able to talk about Turner Contemporary and this 5-year relationship. And that doesn't mean that it's, you know, been perfect. We've always been able to create opportunities to collaborate throughout those 5 years. But there's always the intention of that and an opportunity to come back and improve. And as I said before, I think relationships allow for mistakes to happen. And I think mistakes are important. It's good to be vulnerable. And it's good to be able to work through that. And you can't do that if you're not having relationships. They're just one-off, encounters, campaigns. You can't build on and you can't grow. And growth is so important. And to the last slide. So yes, I really ask you to think about, you know, what will you do after the Friday, and how will you show up? And again, going back to what does solidarity mean to you, and really think about how you can kind of embed that in the way in which you're working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vic. Yeah, that was enlightening and really informative. So thank you very much. I think it is really interesting, and it does take a bravery, I guess, to make those mistakes, which is why we wanted to start the conversation within BIMA and within the members of, we should be making mistakes, and it's about learning from those mistakes and not repeating them. And if there's process to change or organization to change, that's what needs to come from the mistake learning. So yeah, it's really impactful, that giving yourself time, the allowance to make a mistake. Chandeep, your hand's up.
Sure, I was just going to verbally encourage everyone who has those questions in the audience and hasn't just quite asked them yet. Get in now, before you lose that opportunity. And then I'd like to kick us off with a question that I've got, which is, of all those experiences that you've been through, Victoria, and the great work that you've accomplished here, which of those challenges was the single most difficult to overcome in making all the impact you've had?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us, probably our most recent challenge has been part of us establishing a cultural centre. Is we have been part of a process to secure a building, and I think one of the things that have been really difficult is the balance of holding space for community, while also as an organisation, of course, we're here to, our mission is to dismantle systemic racism and do the work to support our community and the healing that needs to take place. But it doesn't mean that we are not ourselves experiencing systemic racism. So for us, it's very real. It's live right now. We've been part of a process that has meant that we've lost a building that was secured for us, and it's riddled, unfortunately, with systemic racism and the process. And the hardest thing for us is trying to get that balance where we can ensure that we keep our communities safe and empowered, and also with that energy of, it really dawned on me what Danny just said earlier about feeling like, no one's here to save you. The challenge is ensuring that we can keep the momentum and that energy, and the sustainability of that, but while also very much up against a system that isn't built for us and doesn't want us to be in it. Yeah, bit rambly, but hopefully that makes sense.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And there aren't any additional questions, so I'm going to ask another one, and then I'll ask if Rich, Rita, and Sophie have any. Have you considered partnership work with other similar smaller organizations as a way of combating some of those challenges on a local level, or in terms of organizations that do work very similar to you but in other geographies to kind of help with that?
Yes, actually, that's a great question. Some of the I think the reason why we've been sustainable and kind of at this point, though we have been in crisis mode, is because some of the networks that we have made that really supported us through that. It's vital. I'm really feel very passionate about this type of collaborative work needs to happen. So we're part of a network called the Mycelium Network that works across the UK with other CADs, which are community asset developers. So these are all organisations across the UK that have assets, buildings that are specifically for communities. And again, often it will be for communities that are from marginalised communities. So it's not necessarily all the communities that are working in the realm of anti-racism, but often they're creating spaces that are most needed for communities, right? And the work that they're doing is they're looking at how collectively we can leverage our collective power, because we're all doing amazing work, right? And to be able to present that to funders, to other stakeholders, to be able to draw down funds to support the work that we're doing. So it feels like there's a real shift currently where definitely this sector are realizing there's power in numbers and collective work. And I think actually for a long period of time, a lot of us were made to feel that you had to work separately, and we're distrusting of other organizations, or there's a feeling of you're competing with other organizations. Whereas now I think people are starting to realize that there's collective power. And I think that goes throughout, you know, there's intersectionalities throughout. And that just means that, yeah, actually there's something powerful about us all coming together and being able to call out the things that aren't working.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Victoria. We could ask you more questions, but we do have some questions and we will share those and we will come back out. You know, one of them is an example of what DEI as a KPI looks like. So we'll collate those. But Gordon is waiting very patiently as our next speaker. So thank you very much, Victoria. And yes, if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, we have our final speaker, Gordon from Shout Out, and he is going to talk us through some language, pronouns, and different topics of how we can be better in that space. So, Gordon, we've ate into your time a little bit, so I shall shut up and look over to you.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Richard. Thanks for having me, and thanks for giving us the opportunity. And it's, you know, a tough to have to follow Victoria. Thanks for doing such an amazing job and making it difficult for me. So my name is Gordon Grehan. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm training and development manager with Shout Out, who are a small Irish charity. And we work with young people. Well, we started off working with young people in schools all across Ireland, in secondary schools, kind of talking about LGBTQ plus topics in spaces where maybe they hadn't been talked about so much before. If we go on to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about our organization to start off with, and the one after that. Thanks. Richard, are you doing the slides? Yeah. Great, thanks. I know who to ask. Okay, so yeah, we're founded in 2012 by a group of young people who had been through the school system in Ireland, hadn't had a great time of it, which is actually a pretty common story for LGBTQ plus people. They don't often have a great time in education. Wanted to make a difference, wanted to create those spaces where we could have the conversations that were needed in schools all across Ireland. And we've grown since 2012 and now have a full-time staff of 5. And we do a lot of work outside of schools now as well. So our focus is always education, but we do work with adults, which is kind of my work. I don't really like talking to young people. I find them terrifying. But at least adults will follow the social norms of society, whereas young people won't. So we do work with workplaces, with services, with sports organizations, with the police, you know, anyone who's interested in a little bit about inclusion or improving their knowledge around LGBTQ plus topics. So that's who we are. I'll move on to the next slide, and I'm going to share with you some of the slides that we use in our presentations and kind of give you a greatest hits of some of the stuff that we do. So Richard, if I can have the next one, please. Great. So this is our acronym, LGBTQIAP+. It may be a little bit longer than you're used to seeing. It's very difficult to say. I do feel a bit like Mary Poppins about to burst into song, trying to get all of those letters out. But what I want to do is to look at our kind of extended acronym and touch on maybe some of the identities or some of the language within this acronym that we may not be so familiar with, and that may not be something that we're quite as used to talking about. Because I think it is important, if we're going to support LGBTQ plus people in our lives, if we're going to talk about topics that we need to talk about, if we're going to raise awareness, we need to have the confidence to do that. And part of the confidence is being able to understand the language and having a bit of confidence around it and not worrying that we're going to say the wrong thing. So this always feels a bit like a weird episode of Sesame Street for me, but here we go. L is for lesbian, and our definition of lesbian is usually a woman mostly attracted to other women. Now, I say usually a woman to allow space for non-binary people, people who don't identify as male or female, but who might want to use the word lesbian to describe their sexual orientation, to feel that they're included within that definition. You know, we work with young people. We want to make sure that we're creating a space and we're using language that makes them feel that they can explore their own identities and that they can use the language that works for them. I suppose maybe it's a good point to say, you know, language for LGBTQ plus people is very important. You know, it's part of how we figure out who we are. It's how we tell ourselves who we are. It's how we tell others who we are. It's how we find other people like us as well. I mean, I remember I came out as gay back in 1994 when I was 15. It must be very hard for you all to believe that I was 15 in 1994. But I was, you know, this is long before broadband, and I was obsessed with finding the stories of other gay men. So I would go and just read anything I could find to try and find other people like me, hear other stories that might be similar to mine, to try and envision a future for myself. So that's why this language is so important for us, and why it's important for us to have this language to speak about ourselves and to figure out who we are and find our tribe. Okay, so that was a lot to say for L. G, which is one of my letters, usually refers to men, but also can be used by women. And if we're using it for men, we'd say usually a man mostly attracted to other men, again, to allow space for our non-binary siblings to use that language if they want. Some women will call themselves gay women rather than lesbian, and that's just a personal choice. It's how they want to use the language. It's absolutely up to yourself in terms of what you want to do. We also understand it as an umbrella term, as something, you know, we hear it like gay bar, gay pride. What we really mean is LGBT bar or LGBT pride. So it's probably a little bit better to say LGBT, but if we do say gay as an umbrella term, it's not the end of the world. We've gotten used to it because the LGBT rights movement was known as the gay rights movement for a very long time. B is for bisexual. And I was doing this session in person with a group in a particularly rural area in Ireland, let's say. And I said, does anyone know what bisexual means? And one man was really eager and stood up and said, greedy. But that is not what bisexual means. Bisexual people are people who are attracted to people of their own gender and others, or attracted to people of more than one gender. You know, in the past, we might have said, bisexual people are attracted to men and women, but now we know that there's more options than just men and women. So again, we want to use that expansive, inclusive definition. So attracted to people of your own gender and others, or attracted to people of more than one gender. The T is for trans or transgender, and I think non-binary people could probably include it here as an umbrella term. And when we talk about trans or transgender people, what we're talking about is people whose gender identity, that's their deeply felt understanding of their gender, of being a man, a woman, or another gender altogether, this like really deep internal sense of yourself, is different to the sex you were assigned at birth. When we talk about trans people, there's often this kind of narrative of difference between how they feel on the inside and how they're perceived on the outside. And then sometimes there will be a change that comes along with that. So they may make some changes in order to make themselves feel comfortable with themselves and comfortable with how other people see them. But T is trans, transgender. The Q is for queer, which is another letter that I will use for myself. A very interesting word, lots of baggage with the word queer. And I think particularly in the English language, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of equivalents in other languages. So it's kind of a little special one we have in English. Originally would have been used against the LGBT community. It would have been seen as a slur. And it kind of says you are different and we don't like that you're different. There's something wrong with you. There's something, you know, that we don't like, we don't trust. You know, you're different in a way that is threatening and we do not like it. So it was used as a slur for a long time, and certainly it's something I experienced myself. I mean, after I came out in school back in 1994, I was bullied in school for being gay. And one of the words my bullies used was they called me a queer. So I heard it in this very hateful context. But I've been on a journey with this word, and our community has also been on a journey with this word, and we have reclaimed it and taken the power back. So in the 80s and 90s, HIV and AIDS activists decided that they were going to start using the word queer and not allow it to be used against us anymore. So they embraced it and they said, do you know what? Yeah, we're different, but that's great. Like, let's celebrate that difference. There's nothing wrong with being different. It's great that we're different. And if you've ever been to a Pride parade or a Pride march, you might have heard people chanting, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. And that's kind of where that chant comes from, those activists in the 80s and the 90s. So very interesting word. What does it really mean? So I think of it as kind of an umbrella term for all of the different letters within our community. I like to use the word queer because it makes me feel connected to all of the lovely people in the community. I've got a lot of amazing trans people in my life. I've got a lot of amazing queer women in my life. And when I say I'm queer, it makes me feel more connected to them rather than just feeling like I'm in solidarity with other gay men like me. If I had to explain it, I would use a sporting metaphor, which would be unusual for me because I've no interest whatsoever in sport. But I would say if I was going to play for my county, I would be on the G team, and if I was going to go national, I'd be on the queer team. So that might help make sense of it. I'd also win a lot of medals if I was on the national queer team, let me tell you. It's also a really good, and I suppose it's important to say for some people of a certain generation, and I have to include myself in there, they will have only heard it in that hateful, negative context, and they will have very strong feelings about this word. So I think we need to be careful about using it on an individual level. I would always check with someone whether they were happy with using that word before I called someone queer. I think for groups of people as a collective, if we talk about the queer community, queer history, queer theory, that's absolutely fine. And young people in schools today use it without that baggage, which I think is wonderful. And they say queer all the time and they don't have any kind of negative association with it. And I think it's great that that's where the language is going. But we need to be just a little bit careful because it does have that kind of negative connotation to it. One of the people who cannot get over the negative side of queer is my own mother, who I turned up to at her house one day with a baseball cap on with queer written across the front. Now, I mean, was I looking for a bit of notice going to her house with a queer baseball cap on? Yes. But would she let me in the house with the baseball cap on? No, because she hated the word so much. She was like, you have to take that off before I let you in. So she cannot see beyond this kind of negative association she has with it. I mean, she grew up a long time ago in rural Ireland and it was just a really, really negative word. So for some people, they still have that sense of negativity and hate kind of with that word. It's also a good point to say that how we use language really depends on the context and the intention behind the words as well. So if I'm walking through Dublin at 3 o'clock in the morning and someone shouts queer at me, I don't stop and go, thank you, I feel so empowered. I feel afraid, I feel threatened because the context is not great and the intention behind being shouted queer at is not probably the greatest. So in all of the ways we use language, it really does depend on the context that language is used in and the intention behind that language. If you've got good intentions, I always think that will carry you through a conversation. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to understand everything. If you're open to it and you're able to say respectfully, I don't know what that means, that's okay. You'll be able to get through the conversations you need to have. Anyway, lots to say about queer there. Some people will also say the Q means questioning to allow people maybe who are just figuring out who they are to also feel part of the LGBT+ acronym if they wish. The I stands for intersex, something maybe that's not very well understood and not something that's talked about, and quite a complex thing to delve into. Intersex people are people who have a difference in their makeup or in their physical body. They have some kind of variation, which means that they don't fit neatly within a medical definition of what is male or what is female. I'm talking about things like your chromosomes, your hormones, your reproductive anatomy, and maybe some of the changes that happen, the secondary sexual characteristics that kick in with puberty. They may look a bit different to how you might expect them to be. So we're really talking about people's biology here. We're talking about biological sex. We're talking about anatomy. It's those kind of differences in someone's body. Not something we understand quite a lot of intersex people out there, but very secretive usually about themselves, understandably, because often we're talking about very intimate parts of ourselves or intimate parts of our anatomy. So people that maybe aren't open about being intersex. And also a lot of people see it as maybe more of a physical thing or medical thing rather than an identity. So it's a lot to discuss around the idea of intersex people. We do include the I in the acronym as a kind of act of solidarity and to raise awareness of the fact that, you know, we're diverse in lots of ways, and biology is one of the ways in which we are very diverse. But it's always kind of an ongoing discussion around whether the I should or should not be included. And I think that's really healthy that we're kind of thinking about that. For the moment, intersex activists would like to be included, so that's where we are. The A is for asexual or aromantic. Asexual people experience little to no sexual attraction to others, and aromantic people experience little to no emotional attraction to others. Important to say, asexual people, aromantic people can have lovely, fulfilling relationships if that's what they want, whatever that might look like, and also can experience intimacy also, but it just might look, the way it works might be a little bit different because they may not be so focused on the sexual element or on the emotional element. Difficult for people to come out as asexual or as aromantic because it's not very well understood, and there is a bit of an assumption in our society that people do experience sexual attraction. So if you don't, the question is often, what's wrong with you, or do you need something, help with something? Does something have to be fixed here? Because we just assume that it's the norm that some people, that everyone will experience sexual attraction. But that's not the case, you know. We're all on a spectrum somewhere around our sexuality, and we all experience different levels of sexual attraction to people. It goes from asexual to hypersexual. I mean, if you're hypersexual, you probably have no free time whatsoever. But asexual to hypersexual, and we're all on that spectrum somewhere. And that can fluctuate over time as well. But for asexual or aromantic people, it's kind of consistent throughout their life that they experience little to no sexual attraction or emotional attraction. And finally, P for pansexual. Pansexual people are attracted to people regardless of gender. So it's about being attracted to someone's personality, someone's energy. Annoying young people will tell us it's about being attracted to someone's vibe. It's not about gender whatsoever. It's very similar to bisexual. So some people do use them interchangeably. My friend Elaine calls herself a bisexual pansexual, but she's very high achieving, Elaine, so I wouldn't mind her. But if you do want to see a difference, it is about that gendered idea of finding someone attractive because of some gendered thing about them, which is something that bisexual people may experience, but not so much pansexual people. But they are very similar. What we find is that young people are using the word pan or pansexual much more so than using the word bisexual. Bisexual is maybe seen as being a little bit exclusionary because of that original understanding of it meaning men and women. So what I think may happen in the future is that we'll see the word pan or pansexual being much more used by young people, and kind of the next generation's bisexual might fall out of use. The plus at the end allows us to shorten the acronym. We absolutely need to shorten it because it's very unwieldy trying to say all of those letters. LGBT plus is as short as it can be. You've got to have the first 4 letters in there. They're like the original Avengers, but it's really up to yourself in terms of where you want to stop. So it can be LGBTQ plus, LGBTI plus, LGBT plus, any of that is fine, but the T absolutely has to be in there. And if you see any organization calling themselves LGB something, that is a big red flag. And I would ask you to use your critical thinking about why they're excluding transgender people from the community. We always include, particularly in schools, some visual representation of some of the LGBTQ plus people that we might be talking about. Always good to kind of, you know, see people who might be like you and have some visibility around that. I will share with you that this is the slide for older people. I was shown the slide for young people when I first joined Shoutout and didn't know who anyone was and really wondered whether I should have taken this job. But this is kind of more recognizable people for me. So it's just nice to kind of have them there. You know, in a longer session, we might dig into some of their identities and kind of some of their experiences. Okay, can I have the next slide, please, Richard? We'll talk a little bit about pronouns, which is one of the things that people have a lot of questions about, and I think people feel a little bit challenged by, lack confidence around. And really, it's about using they, them pronouns for non-binary people in the singular form. So when we talk about non-binary people, mostly we will use they, them in the singular form to talk about them. Now, some non-binary people will use a mix of pronouns, and you'll see that on people's LinkedIn or on their social media. And if they're using a mixture of pronouns, what they're saying is any of those pronouns is fine. They, them in the singular form can feel difficult. It can feel a little bit challenging, like something we're not used to, but we do actually use it all the time. If we were in a room together and someone left something behind and we don't know the gender of that person, we would say, oh, they've left their car keys, we must get them back to them. We don't say, oh, he or she has left his or her car keys, we must get them back to him or her. That's not how we actually speak English. So we do use they, them all the time in the singular form. We're just not used to doing it consciously, and that's where it feels challenging. If you do need to learn a new set of pronouns, or you need to practice using they, them pronouns for somebody new, or you've got a new name that you need to get used to, my big tip is practice out loud. Say it to yourself, say it to someone else, and you will remember it quicker and it will sink in quicker. Practice really is the answer here. We just have to learn new pronouns for someone or a new name for someone, and practicing is really helpful. Now, if you're a family member or very close to somebody who's transitioning or coming out as non-binary, those rules are a little bit different, because you've known someone for a very long time as one name and one pronoun, and it's very difficult to change that. But for the rest of us, where it's kind of, maybe meeting a new person or someone who we don't know that well, it is fairly easy if we just practice and get used to using those new pronouns or the new name. And the reason it's important is because if we use the correct pronouns and the correct name for somebody, what we're saying to that person is, I see you for who you are, I see you in the fullness of your humanity, and I'm treating you with dignity, respect, and kindness. And isn't that what we all want? So using the right pronoun for someone is a nice way of doing that. Now, sometimes we will get it wrong, we will make mistakes, and that's okay. It's absolutely fine to make a mistake. If we've got good intentions, that's fine. If you make a mistake, correct yourself, move on as quickly as possible. No one is interested in how upset you are about making a mistake. We just want to move on with the conversation. So acknowledge you've made the mistake, really important, and just move on as quickly as possible. It can be nice to use your pronouns. I'm using them here in my Zoom name. You might want to use them in your email signature. Sometimes at meetings, you might want to introduce yourself with your pronouns. It can be a nice way of kind of sharing pronoun positivity, of showing people that you're an ally, of letting trans and non-binary people know that they're accepted and welcome. It's not necessary all the time, but it's a handy thing maybe to have in your back pocket to use at certain times. Particularly if I'm working with LGBT people or LGBT groups, it's just kind of the norm that we will share our pronouns and have them as part of the discussion. Okay, and then my final slide, please, Richard. You're doing a great job, Richard. I don't know if anyone's told you.
Next one.
Thank you. So, very brief overview of allyship, and I'm sure a lot of you understand this. I'm getting a sense that you're a really nice group, but allyship is really important. And I suppose this is where it comes into this idea that Pride is not just one day of the year or 1 month of the year, that we need to be allies all throughout the rest of the year. And I would say to you, given what's happening politically in certain countries and some of the changes we're seeing, allyship has never been more important. And if you look at the history of the LGBT rights movement, we have not achieved any of the rights that we've had without allyship, without other people rowing in behind us. This is particularly pertinent in Ireland, where we had a national referendum on same-sex marriage, and it required the entire electorate to come out and vote on whether we could get married or not. And luckily they decided we could, but it meant huge acts of allyship in trying to get people out to vote on that. And obviously, if it had just been LGBT people voting, we wouldn't have had the numbers to make that go through. And it came through with over 60%, which was great. But it was a huge piece of allyship. And that's how we achieve rights, is by getting people to come in behind us. Allyship, never been more important. Education. So here we are having a little bit of education today. This is really important. You have to learn the history, engage the culture, maybe diversify your timeline, maybe start following some different people. The algorithm might give you some different people to look at when you go in on your Instagram or your TikTok. Diversify and have a look at different people's viewpoints and learn. It's not always easy to be an ally. Sometimes we make mistakes and we have to be prepared to make those mistakes. Sometimes we're challenged by other people's lived experience because it's very different to our own. I don't know what it's like to be a non-binary person, but that doesn't mean I can't treat that person with dignity and with respect. I always say I find straight people extremely strange and weird, but happy enough that they get to go on about their lives. And I have straight people in my own family, but I will always treat straight people with dignity, with respect, even though I don't really understand what they're doing. It's also important that we use our power and that we critically engage with the media and support queer groups and queer businesses. I think that's really important. Engaging critically with the media is really important because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there about LGBT people in general, but in particular about transgender people at the moment. And we need to really unpack that and not just take things at face value. There's a lot of discussion happening, well, discussion, I would say in inverted commas, And I think we need to think about whose voices are being platformed and whose aren't. We don't often hear trans people in this toxic debate at the moment, and why don't we? And what is the agenda behind some of the stuff that's being written or said about trans people? It is something that's really upsetting to me, seeing a whole community being monstered. And finally, we need to speak up as allies, which means we need to call out homophobia and transphobia when we see it and when it happens. And that can be difficult. You know, I don't like confrontation. I don't like challenging people. But you know what? We can't allow transphobia or homophobia to become normalized, because that is the thin end of a very nasty wedge, which leads to other really nasty stuff happening. And we've already seen that happen. We've seen rights being rolled back. We've seen, you know, I can only speak, I suppose, for Ireland, but even in Dublin, we've seen higher instances of hate crimes and hate incidents, violence, threats of violence. And I think that all stems from this normalization of, if you can other people, if you can make them feel less human than you, then it gives people permission to act out on that. And homophobia and transphobia does that. So we really need to not allow that. Zero tolerance for the homophobia or the transphobia. And that is it for me. But if you do have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gordon. I think we've got time for one. And then, yeah. So the question is, if I was to misgender somebody and realize in that instance, how would you approach that or advise how someone should acknowledge that? Because I think you could get into that sort of like panic mode of, shit, I know I've made a mistake.
I mean, I think it depends also on like the context in which it happens and how well you know the person, you know? So like, I think the key thing is that you always have to acknowledge that you've made the mistake. So, you know, I would always, like, if when it happens to me, I will say, oh, I'm so sorry, I used the wrong pronoun there. I don't know what was going on in my head, and then kind of move on. But if I knew the person really well, depending, like if it was just a conversation between us, I might be like, I don't know why that happened, or, you know, that just came out. I don't know what happened there. If it was kind of in a more public setting or in a group setting, maybe if I knew the person, I'd take them aside afterwards and go, look, I just really want to apologize for what happened there. I understand your pronouns are whatever they are, and I'm really sorry I got that wrong. You know, I don't know what was going on there. If it was someone I didn't know so well, maybe I wouldn't do that. But the main thing is to acknowledge it in the moment and then move on quickly, so it doesn't become the focus of whatever is happening. And I mean, trans people are used to this happening. It happens to them a lot. So it is something, you know, that if they experience that in a way that someone is really apologetic and has good intentions, that feels totally different to how it happens to them the rest of the day, do you know?
That makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions, we'll package up and get those out, and then we will do the sort of post-event follow up with the BIMA members. If you could go on. So yeah, thank you to the speakers. So yeah, just wanted to actually take a time that, you know, 2 hours talking about some subjects, you know, the start of conversations, and I'm actually really excited to see what BIMA will be in this space, and whether it's actually we need to hold our members to a certain baseline. As a BIMA member, you will have DE&I. If you don't have DE&I, we will help you with that. So yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes. So as a minimum, we will send the slides out. We'll send you links to follow the social accounts of the speakers today. Share their content, engage with them, ask questions, educate yourself further, and be a visible ally. And then for us, we really value feedback. What did we do well? What didn't we in this session? What didn't you hear that you thought you would hear? So we will follow up with feedback form. And yeah, we want to put these events on bigger and better next time. And really answer some of those questions that we didn't get to today. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending. A special thanks to the speakers, and have a lovely, hopefully sunny evening wherever you are. Very sunny in London. That's why I just looked out the window, and I'm feeling like it might be a Sauvignon Blanc evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.